Welcome to the chat module. Let's start by creating a new branch. In this module, we're gonna work in our chat feature. We're gonna create a lot of components, but let's start it with the detail and the list components. First, we need to add the module though. Let's add it to the app module. Now let's create both components inside the chat folder. Now chat list. Now let's go to its module. First, let's import the share module and the routes. We've done this many times, so I'm just gonna go through it fast. Here we add in the share module and the router module, and you need to create these routes. Here in details, later we will change for the ID, but we don't have it now. Let's keep it detailed so we can have a look. Now that's done. Let's go to our routing module. Let's delete these ones and let's add in here the chat module. Again, let's leave it empty so we can control on the other side, load children, and then we're gonna look for the chat module. So let's just add a redirect to the chat and save it. Now if you look in the browser, we have in here all those links that we added before. If you go to the root, it's gonna redirect us to the chat list. And let's also have a look on the detail. That works good, great. Let's add a link in here for the chat. We're going to fix this nav bar in a later module. Here, let's just copy the gallery and add chat. So now I have the one. Now that you can navigate, let's remove this nav bar for a second so we can have a look on how we're gonna display our chat detail. So here we want a nav bar. The large part of the component will be where it's gonna display the chat message, and on the bottom we want user input. So let's create the divs. First, a main to wrap everything around. Let's add a mat toolbar for button. Here, let's put a mat icon. Save it, and we have it there. The button has to be mat icon, so you get the round shape. Nice. Let's give the mat toolbar a color. We're gonna use our app-wide variable for primary color. If you remember, we set this variable in here in our style CSS. We have a primary color and background color. There you have it. We need to make the icon color to be white. I'm gonna create another div where you're gonna add the feed that will contain all messages from that chat. And what I'm using here is emet abbreviation. If you do a dot and put whatever name you want, that's gonna become a class. You can also add a hash, and that will become an ID. So we have that one. Let's create one for the input. And here I'm gonna add a HR. Chat feed and chat input. There we go. So now let's give it some color so we can see which one is which. Background color, Rebecca purple. Just gonna copy this one and changing here for input, and let's give it a different name. Medium sea green. Now we have the two divs that will hold our chat component's main functionality. Let's start with the chat input. Let's make its position fixed. Now we need to set up the button, left and right button, put 0, so it stays in the bottom. Now we need to set left and right. There. Now we need to make this full width, and we need to make it scrollable as well. Let's go to the chat feed. overflow Y for the vertical. Let's make it scroll. Yeah, and now we have this scroll bar in here. If you don't add the Y, it's gonna display a scroll both ways, on a horizontal and a vertical side. Here we have horizontal and a vertical. For the height, let's make a calc, and here we know we want it 100% of the view height, but then we need to minus both the navbar and the input. Let's start with 120 pixels. Not quite so, we still have some white in here. The best way to achieve this is to give both the toolbar and the input a height, so we know exactly how many pixels to subtract. So let's give it a height of 50 pixels. And for the bottom, let's give it a bit more space. So height, let's give it 70 pixels. And now we know that we have a 120 to remove. So now we don't have anything here to scroll, and we have this ugly bar in here. Let's make the overflow auto, so it will disappear from our view. Now let's check if the overflow works. Let's make it a H3, and I'm gonna paste it a few times. So the overflow is working, but we have this ugly white area in here. Let's add this overflow in its own line. And let's do the auto in here. Okay, now it works. There we have it. Our input is in there. We have our feed with the scroll. And if you remove some of this, our scroll disappears. And again, now we have it back on. So it would be nice if when the page loads, it automatically scrolls down to the bottom, because this should scroll every time we receive a new message. So let's add that now. The chat details. So we're gonna need to import some stuff from Angular core. We need the view child. We're also gonna need elements ref and after view checked lifecycle. So we're going to use this add view child, and we're going to give a scroller. This we can name anything. This is for us to use inside our HTML. Call it feed, and it's going to be the element reference. Let's target a div with this scroller. I'm going to add in here on the chat feed. Whenever the chat feed child changes, in a case of a new message, it will load this scroller. We're going to use this after view checked. Scroll to bottom, and now let's create a function. This will be a type of void. Scope, fine. Let's give it a type of any. And here we will target the element. And use the chat feed. The scroll pane dot scroll top equals to scroll pane dot scroll height. So now let's check, bring this up in here, and let's reload, and it goes to the bottom. Okay, so we're done in here. Let's continue. And as you can see, because we added the view height 100%, it is completely responsive. So now let's just remove this from here, and we're going to continue with the creation of our components. Now, let's create the chat feed and chat input now. GG. component, chat input, and the chat feed. Now let's export them so we can use them inside our chat detail. Here, let's create an export array. Chat input and the chat feed. Back in our chat detail, HTML, we're going to add those components in here. And for the chat input, and let's try to build upon it. First, let's go for the chat input and add a form field in there. Inside, we're gonna add an input. We don't need the type. It's a mat input from Material Angular, and let's give it a placeholder. Send message. So we have our input in there, and it's small. Let's add an icon so we can use it as a button. Let's use the send icon, which is the envelope flying max suffix. This will give it, put the icon on the right hand side. On the CSS, let's target the mat form field and give it 100% width. Now we have it. It's all right. Let's go back to the chat details and remove that color. We don't need it anymore. With that done, let's continue adding components to our chat. The chat feed will hold a list of messages. Now we have the detail and the list. The list will display a list of threads. Whoever sends you a message is going to be there. And the detail is showing the chat room or chat window, which contains the message and input. The feed will contain a collection of messages that belongs to this thread. Let's create two other components. One is message, singular, and a message, plural. The message is the array that we're going to add in here on the feed. So to add in here, we need to add it to the exports array. Message, now we can import in here. Message works. Now we can remove this color as well from the detail CSS. So our chat detail is complete for now. Let's put back the navbar in here from the app component. You can just come here and uncomment, and you can see it still works responsibly. Now let's create the chat list. The chat list we know is a collection of threads. So let's create another two components, and those will be the last, I promise. GG component. It's going to be a thread singular as well, and threads plural. And the threads we need to add it to the exports array so we can add it to the chat list. Now the last thing we need to create is not a component. We need to create the services and the models. Each of those is going to have a model and a service, the message and the thread, so we can keep them separate from each other, and it will be easier to build upon this chat in the future. So let's create a service for the message singular. As you can see here, I didn't pass the -m flag, so it didn't get added to the chat module. So let's do it again for the thread service. And I'm going to pass the flag and put in the chat module. So it was updated. Now if you go to the chat module, you see here the providers, the chat thread service was added. But we also needed the message service in here. So let's add it manually. Message service. Now let's add it to the providers. Okay. Just remember to pass the M flag so we don't need to do it manually. And now let's create the modules. If you remember, we can add them like as a ng generate class, but it will be added without the model to its name, but let's add one without. Yeah, we have our class, and it's always good to keep the type of file it will be. We'll just add model to it. Let's create a new file for the thread.model.ts. So now we have everything to finally start building our chat. Let's just commit the changes to Git before we continue. Git add, git commit -m for a message. So in the next lesson, we're going to start to build our models and our services.